And welcoming you all for everything that you're doing, but thanking you all for all the work that you're doing, because the collaboration in reimagining service and what has been put together is actually incredibly helpful from a perspective on the policy side, to be able to hear about the conversations that are taking place, to be able to know what are the challenges, what's being worked through, and to really think about how policy might think about reimagining service a little bit differently based on these conversations that are taking place in the community. Just this morning, I was moderating a session between the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, and this conversation, Mark Guerin actually raised this point, which I think is important. Sometimes individual organizations do great jobs, and we all individually are doing a great job, but there is still this question I think we have to ask ourselves is, collectively, is that having an impact? So is the graduation rate changing? Is the community's economic well-being increasing because we are all existing, or is it that we need to find ways to work more effectively together to make that happen, and how do we do that? So that's an interesting question.
My name is Kyra Esgate, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of Reimagining Service. I know many of you are familiar with the work of Reimagining Service, but for those of you who are not, I want to give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we're all about. Reimagining Service is a national, multi-sector coalition of nonprofits, government, corporations, funders, and others who are dedicated to increasing the impact of service and volunteering nationwide. We hope that today's forum will do two things for you. One, it'll give you a sense of where Reimagining Service is headed in the months to come, and two, give you a sense of how the work and principles of Reimagining Service are coming to life every day in local communities. And we hope that by the end of today's session, you'll gain some new insights that will inspire your work or help you think about your work in new ways when you go home following the conference. As many of you know, the work of Reimagining Service began in 2009 with a small group of leaders who saw an opportunity to increase the impact of service and volunteering. That group recognized that a lot of good work was happening in local communities and in certain facets of the sector, but little had been done to broaden that conversation across corporate partners, nonprofit partners, funders, and et cetera. And that's really where Reimagining Service is stepping in, working to try to create that conversation across all the sectors within volunteering. As a result, the idea of the volunteer ecosystem emerged, and you heard both Sonal and Eric talk about that earlier today. And we think that this is a really important concept, and we hope that you'll think about this as you return home. The idea here is that none of us can really actually achieve what we're hoping to have happen in local communities if we're not working together. Corporations, for example, need to think about their role in both supplying volunteers as well as funders. And they need to recognize that how they approach that work and how they interact with nonprofit organizations and others in the community really will change how volunteers are engaged within the local communities. In addition to our work with the principals, we've also commissioned research that I know many of you have been able to look at, and that's really helped us better understand the mismatch between volunteers and the demand for volunteers, as well as how organizations are actually utilizing best-in-class volunteer management practices throughout their organizations. So last year, for those of you who were with us, you saw us talking about kind of why all of this work is important. And how we're really moving forward at this point in time is how we're going to move forward together. So we've got the principles, we've got the research, and now how do we put all of this in practice and really make a change and have greater impact in local communities? So there are three themes that you're going to hear us talk about as we move forward with Reimagining for Service. The first is practice. The second is research. And the third is funding.
This is an amazing coalition, and it's such an important effort. We all, I won't preach to the choir too much, but we all know that this sector is by the people, for the people. We are driven by our human capital, and the volunteers within our nonprofit sector, our social sector, make up by far the largest part of our human capital. And to continually reimagine what the potential of that group is, and continually think about how we can be more effective and more efficient in the work that we're doing, I think is such a thrill for me, and it's why I love being a part of this coalition. Without further ado, let me ask each of them to just say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into the questions.
Great. I'm Gary Bagley. I'm the Executive Director of New York Cares. Basically, we plan and manage volunteer projects at 1,200 nonprofits and city agencies in the 5 boroughs. Last year, we actually mobilized 53,000 individuals in volunteer service, and we filled somewhere around 175,000 volunteer positions in the city. That's a little bit about, that's the big picture, and in discussing some of the questions that come up, I'll be able to give you a little more detail beyond those big numbers.
Great. Hi, I'm Diane Melly with the IBM company. I'm a director in corporate citizenship and corporate affairs, and have the pleasure of running our global volunteerism initiatives for the last 8 years now. So I've learned a lot and hope to share our lessons learned with you today. I don't know that I can represent all companies in the world, but I will do my best to share my thoughts with you.
Hi, my name is Liz Blake, and I'm with Habitat for Humanity International. Most people think of Habitat as one entity. In fact, it's a federation. We have 1,560 affiliates in the United States. All of them are independent nonprofits. So we represent both the large nonprofits and the tiny nonprofits that have nothing but volunteers for their staff and all service delivery. Habitat collectively is the 6th largest home builder in the United States. That's a reflection of the economy. We were 14th largest when I started 5 years ago. The economy is terrible, but we're 6th largest now. We build 7,500 houses or significant repairs. We mobilize just under 1 million volunteers a year, but I need to give a shout out to Eric and the corporation because the largest bulk of those are supervised directly by our AmeriCorps. And our AmeriCorps members supervise almost 200,000 of the volunteers that we have that enable us, and they touch the families of almost half the families that we serve. So.
My name is Rosa Moreno Mahoney, and I'm a Deputy Director for AmeriCorps with the Corporation for National Community Service. And in that capacity, we place over 80,000 AmeriCorps members at organizations like Habitat for Humanity in about 14,000 organizations across the country. In addition to that, my team oversees and supports the Volunteer Generation Fund that you heard Eric talk a little bit about. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and that role that government can play in supporting the ecosystem that we're talking about today.
So let's jump right in and think a little bit about the role that Reimagining Service plays within our communities. So Gary, you have a ton of experience in this field. I won't embarrass you with how many years you've been doing this work, but you started to give us some statistics there about the size of New York Cares in your scope. So can you talk a little bit about what got you involved in Reimagining Service and what you think the value is to you?
Sure. Well, you know, when I heard that they were going to ask me this question, I thought, well, what I probably have to do is just go back and have the same conversation with all of you that I had with my board chair when everybody asked me to be part of Reimagining Service, because like everybody here, I have to balance a desire to learn from the field, help the field, with also sort of taking care of the home front, if you will. There are a few things that I consider to be very important, and I think for anybody who's a member of Points of Light, Hands-on Network, we live this every day, which is that we bring together the many different communities that are part of Reimagining Service, right? We're at that intersection point between understanding what our community partners need, what volunteers want, and what donors are expecting and sometimes demanding of us. So a lot of what Reimagining Service is trying to accomplish is a re-education, if you will, a group re-education of the sector that we have felt in our role, like we frequently feel in the position of trying to manage, to make people understand and really well-meaning people understand that the needs of the nonprofit organization are needing to be filled. And that's the first job as we see it. Our mission is to meet pressing community needs. We almost, and I dare to say this in this room, we almost think of volunteers as how we make that happen, not the what, right, if you will. So it was exciting for me to hear that there was a conversation that was going on amongst all the stakeholders, that New York Cares could both participate in that, and that as a member, especially of the Hands-on Network Points of Light, that there was a way that everything we've been learning, we could also bring to the table as well as bring back. At the end of the day, you know, I have already found that the conversations are tremendously helpful. I would let everybody know that we are committed to bringing a very open spirit to the discussion, which I have enjoyed, and I may have at times been framed as the skeptic in the room, appropriately so. But I think it's that spirit of questioning to say, what about this is new, and what about it is really us finally listening to each other in a way that can really move everything forward. I'm already seeing from those discussions things that have benefited New York Cares, on a selfish level, if you will, as well as a forum for us to really share not only the positive things where we're all showing off our most recent accomplishments, but really opening up the issues that we're all seeing together and problem solving in a way to take that forward. So
thank you,
that's a little bit about it.
Thank you. Liz, I wanted to talk with you next a little bit about this concept of service enterprises. And it's something that Reimagining Service has been working on really for the last year or two now. I love the concept. I think we're still playing around with the definition. We have a series of words that follow it that seem to describe it for us, and we like them. But in terms of what a service enterprise is and isn't, what its applications are you just a service enterprise one day, or what is the continuum of continually being a better and better service enterprise? I think a lot of people would look at Habitat and say, now there is a service enterprise. There is an organization that has built its entire program to a large extent around volunteer talent, but you see it a little differently, and you've taken it to the next level. So tell us a little bit about how you see the service enterprise concept playing out at Habitat.
Thank you, James. Actually, I've got to go back to my first comment, which is that Habitat is not monolithic, it isn't singular. And we have 900 of our affiliates that have no staff at all and are run completely by volunteers. Our larger affiliates, which produce 200 or 300 houses apiece, will have a paid staff. They're usually blessed to have an AmeriCorps member or two. And then they are run by volunteers as well. And there's quite a difference. If you actually look under the covers of what Habitat is, there's quite a difference between some very, very inefficient organizations that really think of volunteers only as the people that come to the work site, and those that bring the volunteers in and make the volunteers critical to how the affiliate actually organizes itself. Part of the reason that we're getting more and more to be a service enterprise at the affiliates that are farther along in the continuum is because we've taken on the necessity that other parts of this community have, or this economy have, which is with foreclosures and the housing industry really going into a downturn. It was politically incorrect for us to start building new houses, which is kind of our core. We get the volunteers out from a church group or a synagogue or a community center and start building. And that wasn't what our communities needed. So Habitat had to adapt to what its communities needed. And in doing that, the best of the Habitat affiliates then adapted to what the volunteer skill sets were, and were able to try to blend the needs of the community with what was available and actually be more proactive in solving community needs.
Rosa, let's close out this discussion of the ecosystem and just take a look at what you see as the role of government within all of this, and particularly the corporation and the state service commissions. How do you think that they can contribute to kind of a more healthy sector when it comes to service?
Great. So kind of the framework for me is we think about that the social problems we have are really complex. And at the heart and center of that strategy to address those problems is an engaged and motivated citizenry, where we're making a difference. And so I'm kind of going to take Kyra's liberty and say we all need to be ready to support that. And so where I see the role of where government fits in this, where the Corporation for National Community Service and what the state service commissions can bring, I think we can bring leadership. You heard Diane say we can bring focus and an agenda. We can bring resources. Through whether it's any of our national service programs or other assets that we bring, access to training or technical assistance, knowledge management through research.